All right, good evening, and welcome to this International Center for Moral Injury webinar, during which we will welcome Kevin Denholm for a presentation and discussion on moral injury and pathways to healing in the film industry. My name is Brian Powers, and I'm the Executive Director of the International Center for Moral Injury, or the ICMI. As tonight's webinar resonates deeply with the aims, the vision, and the purpose of the ICMI, I should just note that the ICMI is committed to producing and receiving new scholarship on moral injury, facilitating new research by building networks of academic scholars, military members, chaplains, clergy, and others with knowledge of and experience with moral injury. The ICMI seeks to create and develop resources for counselors, caregivers, churches, and faith organizations caring for morally injured individuals. And each of these things serves the center's ultimate goal of increasing an understanding of the causes and impacts of moral injury and facilitating increased care for those experiencing it. Lastly, let me just note that with all our webinars on moral injury, certain aspects of the conversation certainly can evoke quite intense and personal feelings. Please exercise self-care and stepping away if you need to, and do know that there is help available if you feel overwhelmed. Jane's posting the link to lifeline-international.com, and I would certainly invite you to utilize them and find the resources contained within that site if you need. Now, let me introduce our speaker this evening, joining us at a very early hour in New Zealand, Kevin Denholm. Kevin is a PhD candidate at the University of Otago, whose research explores moral injury within New Zealand's film industry. With over 3 decades of experience as a director, writer, and co-founder of Exposure International, Kevin has led major commercial campaigns alongside humanitarian film projects across more than 50 countries. His work engages themes of justice, trauma, and resilience, particularly within vulnerable and marginalized communities. Ordained within the Anglican Church, he also pioneered FilmChaplain, Aotearoa's first film industry chaplaincy, providing on-location pastoral support for cast and crew. Kevin's research integrates creative practice, chaplaincy, and critical inquiry to examine the ethical and psychological challenges faced by film industry professionals. His work is grounded in cross-disciplinary methodologies and draws on indigenous and theological frameworks to propose culturally informed models of care for those working in high-stakes, emotionally demanding, creative environments. So it's my honor to welcome him to our ICMI podcast series. And Kevin, I turn things over to you.
Thank you very much, Brian. I really appreciate it. And thank you for everyone turning up today. Well, kia ora koutou, ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa. Ko Kevin Denholm toku ingoa. My name is Kevin Denholm, as you've heard. And again, thanks, Brian, for your introduction. Also, a special thank you to the ICMI for inviting me to present today. And thank you to all of you for watching this from various parts of the globe. I really do appreciate being able to share my research with you. Now, a little bit of background on me. I have spent, as Brian said, my whole career working within the film industry in New Zealand and abroad. And in 2023, I completed a Masters in Chaplaincy at the University of Otago here in New Zealand. And I'm now 22 months into my PhD journey. So today, my plan is I'm going to take you behind the scenes of the film industry to explore moral injury. But first, perhaps can I just mention that some of the topics today are distressing, and it may be triggering for some. And I obviously take Brian's mentioned this trigger warning as well. So just perhaps just be aware of that. So this presentation will cover 3 main areas. And for any of you who were at Durham, my apologies in advance, because the content here is based largely on what I did up there. So there'll be a lot of similarities. So first of all, I'm going to set the scene, sharing some of the experiences that led to the research. Then I'll take you through my research findings, and then finally talk about the challenges of applying research to practice and how I'm actually using my PhD to establish a care model within the film industry in New Zealand. So, the film industry is often seen as really glamorous and exciting. And over the past 30 years or so, I have been really lucky enough to film in all sorts of diverse locations, from Asia and Africa to the icy landscapes of Antarctica. Um, I've worked with some really big names in Hollywood. I've worked with drug lords in Colombia and alongside hippos in Zambia. And in many ways, it really is an exciting and at times, I guess, glamorous career. However, the reality behind the scenes it can be vastly different. It's extremely long hours, very demanding deadlines, and intensive creative pressure, all of which lead to this, I guess, tinderbox of hidden challenges. These challenges are very rarely talked about, and they're often swept under the carpet, even by those of us working within the industry. A decade ago, a decade ago, I visited the set of a major film being shot here in New Zealand. And I arrived to find the usually upbeat crew that I knew really well looking really, really uncomfortable. When I asked what was wrong, a camera assistant just said, "Look, Kevin, working on this film, I've seen things I never thought I would have to see." And what followed was a flood of stories of what was going on this film. Over months of filming, relatively mild sex scenes had escalated into graphic depictions of sexual assault and violence, including the rape of slaves and brutal executions. The cast and crew were struggling. They were feeling trapped by the content they were creating and by the non-disclosure agreements or NDAs that they had signed, which was preventing them from talking about their experiences, even to those closest to them. And it's fair to say it was taking a huge emotional toll. That moment was really pivotal for me because it stayed with me. And I realized that as a director and a film company owner, I was probably uniquely positioned to actually address this. I wanted to provide some sort of practical support, but I also needed to properly understand the psychological and emotional impacts the cast and the crew were experiencing. I also realized that I'd need a very strong research-based approach to support my observations. And so this realization led me to pursue my Master of Chaplaincy research in 2022-23. And it was during that time that I first came across the term moral injury. I had never heard of it before. And I began to wonder if this was actually what the crew I'd talked with a decade ago had experienced or were experiencing. And so began my journey in moral injury research. My study was entitled When the Camera Cuts, Investigating Moral Injury in the Film Industry of Aotearoa New Zealand. It's currently embargoed actually because of the sensitivity of the findings, and I can talk about that later, perhaps in the question and answer time. My PhD that I'm now well into builds on that foundation, and it's obviously expanding the scope to explore the broader impacts of moral injury on film professionals and to develop this on-location model of chaplaincy care, which is tailor-made for the film industry. Now, understanding moral injury, I'm relatively confident that everyone on this webinar will be very familiar with Jonathan Shea's early definition of moral injury. I'm also pretty confident that we know that moral injury can occur in a wide range of high pressure, hierarchical environments where individuals face moral and ethical conflicts. And this is just a small list of the areas where we know moral injury exists. But through my research, I seek to add the film industry to this growing list. And the reason for this is that as both a chaplain and a filmmaker, I could really see the direct parallels between the military's structured, high stakes, hierarchical environments and the film industry. We operate under very similar, in very similar ways, lots of the time. And I started to question whether the nature of film production was actually creating similar psychological wounds amongst the crew and cast members required to recreate or endure scenes of disturbing content as part of their job. So when I broke down Shay's definition of moral injury directly within the film industry, a very bleak picture began to emerge. Just jammed there, bear with me. Firstly, a betrayal of what's right, or perhaps in other words, a specific moral transgression. And I want to say here that the word moral is actually quite a significant barrier for many people. Morality often feels taboo in the very open-minded world of the film community, yet it underpins the discomfort expressed by many of my participants. Crew members reported witnessing or participating in really dehumanizing behavior, especially towards what we call extras or film extras. They're often referred to awfully as warm props or cattle. And this quote, I mean, they can come in, they get naked, and then they get paid, and then they go away. It sums it up. I'll be using, by the way, a lot of quotes throughout this presentation, all of which come from my research. By someone who holds legitimate authority. The hierarchical structure of film means that those in power, such as directors or producers or the studio executives, wield significant power and control over what is filmed and how it is filmed. And my participants frequently cited instances where they felt pressure by those higher up to compromise their values just to keep their jobs. In this quote, I got hauled into his office and told, never say no to me ever again. You can never say no. And then in a high stakes situation, the film industry is highly competitive. It's fast paced, and the pressure to perform can often override personal ethics. It's also an immense amount of money, which adds to the high stakes. I mean, it's not uncommon for there to be many hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars spent per day on large film productions. So the stakes for getting things right are pretty high. Crew members that I spoke to talked about the immense stress of these long hours, tight deadlines, and this constant fear of losing future work if they voiced any objection. This quote pretty much sums it up. Ugh, the hours, the pressure, the stress. I don't like the hold it can take on your life. It can be all-consuming, and you can realize it's been 6 weeks since you've seen family or friends. Now, my research involved interviews with a really wide and diverse group of film professionals. And this included, for example, an editor who was required to sift through hours and hours of sexually aggressive footage, a makeup artist with their own personal history of sexual assault, having to recreate bruises on a rape victim, and a props buyer who inadvertently caused the killing of an animal to be used as a prop. Now, All of these were left to process these experiences in silence and without any real adequate support. The stories that have emerged pose really critical ethical questions about the unseen emotional and psychological toll on those behind the scenes. And I guess it's fair to say my conclusion was that moral injury is absolutely present in the film industry, and it's often hidden behind a culture of silence, of NDAs, and professional ego. Now, several recurring themes emerged in the research. Um, the first one, hierarchy, I guess it's really unsurprising that this was a major theme. As I've said, the film industry operates with a clear chain of command. Within each department, those at the top hold the most responsibility, they earn the highest pay, and they wield significant power and control, as I've mentioned. Now, while this structure is actually really largely efficient, it does create at times a challenging environment that fosters an abuse of power. Hierarchy is a huge thing. You're not only massaging a position, you're massaging an ego. Disturbing content creation. Participants were often required to be directly involved in creating violent or sexually explicit content, which left many of them feeling conflicted and emotionally drained. The content, for this quote, the content was so brutal, but after you do killing just for months on end, it definitely affects you. It just stays with you. And then extreme violence and sexual content. This repeated exposure to scenes of extreme violence, sexual assault, and abuse was actually having a cumulative effect on many of the crew members. This quote, I think, is particularly tough, but it was like he was straight into some rape scene, and all the crew that I talked to were affected. They were all like, man, that was some real disturbing shit. They were all affected, and there was no counselling for them. Another theme that came up repeatedly was cultural conflict. And this was particularly true for the Māori participants. Māori are the Indigenous people here in New Zealand. And there was a real strong conflict between their cultural values and the portrayals of Māori that they were being asked to create. And this dissonance further contributed to feelings of moral injury and disconnection. This quote, I've been involved in films that don't align with my Māori-tonga. That means what it is to be Māori. I mean, who are all Māori like this? Do we all bash our women? No, it's not how I was brought up, but I've never been in a position to voice that. Now, leading moral injury researchers Lindsay Carey and Timothy Hodgson have developed an excellent and comprehensive framework which identifies 4 types of injury experienced in their research by military veterans, and that is biological, physical, psychological and emotional, social, familial, and spiritual injuries. Their holistic screening model captures a wide range of biopsychosocial spiritual symptoms that signal moral injury. And it was really interesting that all 4 of Carey and Hodgson's biopsychosocial spiritual injuries emerged as the hidden costs behind the so-called glamour of filmmaking. Just going to breaking this down a little bit further. So under the heading of biological physical injury falls alcohol and drug abuse. Like many high stress industries, film professionals often turn to alcohol and drugs as a way to manage the intense emotional burdens of their work. However, in the film industry, substance abuse frequently becomes a way to numb the impact of disturbing scenes and experiences on set. because I think everyone self-medicates after they finish those jobs. They're all just like, whoa, that was heavy. Man, let's have some drinks or let's have a joint. Self-sabotage also falls under this heading. Many participants initially described the film industry as their dream job, but the reality of dealing with disturbing or morally compromising content appeared to be becoming overwhelming. They talked about walking away from careers they once loved because they could no longer cope with the demands. Below the film industry, below my career, it just wasn't worth it for the sake of what I was exposed to. And sadly, suicide. Tragically, suicide is a very real issue for us within the industry, though it's really spoken about openly. Now, it's impossible to directly attribute specific suicides to moral injury. The stories shared by participants suggested that there was a desperate need for safe spaces where cast and crew could confidentially discuss their mental health struggles. This quote, I think it really messed such and such up. It has that effect on people and they just can't deal with it. There's a lot of on-set suicides. You work such long hours and you never get to talk to anyone about that. These people are just lost. The quote, the person this person's referring to was someone that we had all worked with a lot, very closely. Under the heading of psychological emotional injury falls triggering. Now, as you would expect, the diversity of experiences in the film community mean that many individuals carry their own personal traumas. And this was certainly true of many of my participants. Filming violent, abusive, or traumatic scenes often triggered these past lived experiences, which resulted in significant emotional distress. And this emotional toll was disrupting not only their work, but also their personal life as well. I felt really nauseous and distressed, and it just got to the point where I just couldn't cope with it. Depression, for some, the highly visual environment of the film industry was making it difficult to escape the disturbing imagery that they were helping to create. This lingering effect led in some cases to depression as individuals struggled to process what they'd witnessed or been involved in creating on set. In this quote, I remember at the time, whenever I closed my eyes, I had that imagery in my head and I didn't want it there. I didn't want it there. It was depressing and horrible. Now, the image that this participant was talking about was actually a rape scene of a young girl, something her own daughter had sadly experienced. Guilt and shame fall under this heading, and they were really recurring themes throughout many of my interviews. Participants described feeling conflicted about their roles, especially when creating sexually explicit or violent content that conflicted with their own personal values. For them, this sense of moral compromise led to lasting feelings of self-condemnation. This quote, I had a naked girl sitting on top of me, and that was burned into my memory. I think the guilt probably came in the weeks following. Under the heading of social or familial injury falls spousal, partner, and family disconnections. Now, these are very real within the film industry. However, I think it was important to separate out any disconnections directly caused by moral injury. The participant who I quoted earlier regarding their guilt and shame to filming a sexually explicit scene actually then went on to describe how they were unable to talk about it with their own partner, about what they'd participated in on set. This in turn has led to an ongoing significant disconnection with their own life partner. I was put in a situation where we were both naked. You're offered a piece of foam to put in between your genitalia so that you don't get aroused. It's bloody crazy, man. I'm like, man, I can't tell my wife half this stuff. Under spiritual injury falls moral pain and dissonance. One participant who described being raised in a religious family really stood out in this area. Due to the extreme nature of the content that they had been helping to create for many years, they expressed a sense of losing their way morally and a very real dissonance with their own family's espoused values. Well, I grew up in a religious family and I had lots of morals and lots of things that I believed in at the start of my career. Over time, they all kind of diminished really because everything was against what my parents had brought me up as. And so it was all, you're either all in or you're not. It was all pretty loose. And so slowly that becomes your normality and everything else goes out the window. Self-condemnation was prevalent in multiple situations within the study group. One participant described themselves as feeling dirty and sinful as a result of working on explicit sexual content. Another participant described how they had inadvertent, well, this situation here where they, about the highly unethical act of an animal being killed, so that it could be used as a prop. Now, they didn't actually do this act, but the guilt and the shame and the condemnation that this person still feels today is very, very real. I was just so disappointed in myself that I'd let this happen. I could have said no and just maintained my personal moral compass, but I didn't. And then loss of caring. This was a really interesting one because as the film industry, the community, the film community tends to care very deeply for each other. We're away for extended periods of time, so we get to know each other really well. And this care extends to the projects that we're working on. However, when participants talked about being desensitized by the content that they were creating, a loss of caring became evident. Some of the participants felt that they've traveled so far down the track of creating content they once considered morally injurious that they just didn't care anymore. One participant described themselves as being so far gone, while another stated that they'd lost their North Star. And this person said, I've seen that, done that. It's kind of desensitized my sensitivity around the wrongs and rights of what I was filming. I'm not saying it made it right, but it became normalized. Now, while my research provided really valuable insights into the presence of moral injury within the film industry, translating these findings into practical support for the industry has actually been really challenging. Very few busy film industry professionals are likely to take the time to read an academic journal containing my research, and even fewer will share it within their networks. This, I think, highlights the disconnect between academic research and film industry application. And for me, it underscored the need for a different approach, one that makes my research accessible, but also engaging and directly relevant to those within the film industry. But there is absolutely this undercurrent of fear present. Participants describe working in this country's film industry as extremely rewarding and creatively challenging. However, there is this undercurrent of fear that the closeness on set only actually goes so far, that sensitive issues such as those surrounding moral injury are not currently up for discussion. and that serious mental health concerns are rarely aired. I don't want anyone inside the film industry to know that I'm in a state of needing help. And today, virtually every movie production has some element in it that could potentially cause some level of moral conflict. And so, with so much internal competition for work, participants did not see that talking about moral conflict even as an option, because they really didn't want people to know that they were struggling, because they didn't want to lose work. Concern was also raised by participants regarding the lack of time and space allowed to process incidents and content that they were being exposed to on set. There's no place to talk about it or to get help. There's no safe place. There's no neutral place. There's no non-judgmental helping department. Our industry does a great job now of providing on-set physical safety with full-time trained safety officers, and they're required to be present at all times. And increasingly, particularly after the Me Too movement, what's called intimacy coordinators now provide safety for actors when filming sexual content. But this study has revealed that there's a very clear desire amongst at least the participants I spoke to for there to be some sort of neutral on-set care, a confidential resource for those seeking emotional and or spiritual support. If someone had checked in with me, I probably would have said, yeah, I'm really scared. I don't know how to say this, but I'm feeling really uncomfortable. Can you help me? And so this is what has led to the establishment of FilmChaplain. FilmChaplain is a dedicated on-location support service created specifically for the unique demands of the film and television industry. What we do is obviously support well-being, and well, the idea is well-being in this high-pressure industry. I absolutely understand the industry. I've worked in it my whole life. I speak the language of film. I know the rhythms of a set, and I understand how important it is to be present, but also unobtrusive. Now, like any chaplaincy role, we exist to offer support, whether that's emotional or spiritual or simply practical support. Hopefully, we're a calm, compassionate presence on locations, someone that people can come to when they're struggling or even just when they need to be heard. And importantly, we're there for everyone, regardless of background, belief, or their role on set. And if you want to find out more, just have a look at our website, filmchaplain.com. Then I thought, well, let's make a film. What better medium than using film itself to communicate to the film industry? And this led me to explore creative practices research, or CPR, as a PhD methodology. CPR positions creative practice, which in my case is filmmaking, as central to the research process. And it blends my skills as a filmmaker, my academic research on moral injury, and the practical application of establishing my FilmChaplain offering. Now, at this stage, and I'll speak more about that later, but at this stage, the centerpiece of my final submission will be an ethnographic film titled Loitering with Intent that explores moral injury and its effects on film professionals. Now, the film is designed to be both a creative output and a research tool designed to provoke thought, challenge perceptions, and encourage dialogue within the industry. And by placing myself within the narrative, autoethnography allows me to really reflect critically on my journey as a chaplain, and it offers a lens through which to examine the cultural and emotional landscapes of the film industry. Now, obviously, accompanying the film will be a critical exegesis documenting my journey and tying together all the theoretical, practical, and personal elements of this work. Now, the reason I said at this stage I'll be making a film is that, speaking candidly, I'm currently experiencing significant roadblocks to access. And without access to film sets and to the people working on these film sets, it's very hard to make a film on this topic. Film chaplaincy is a completely new concept in the film industry, certainly in New Zealand. It's never been done before, and I have yet to find it actually operational anywhere else in the world either. And very few people in the industry even know what a chaplain is, let alone what they can offer. I think this quote sort of sums it up pretty well. What on earth is a chaplain? I've heard that so many times. The second real fear is this, that it's going to add complexity. Producers are currently quite hesitant to engage FilmChaplain support because they're wary that it could open up the door to unforeseen issues for them or extra responsibilities that they then have to deal with. And this particular quote is from a line producer on a very large international film that's just about to start filming here in New Zealand. And they say, we are finding that a lot of crew, if given the opportunity, will find any excuse to complain. That's not entirely true, but creating an open door environment, we believe, could actually backfire in a negative way. Excuse me. And then religious connotations. The word chaplain, I'm finding, is carrying significant negative religious connotations. And it's leading to suspicion or misunderstanding, particularly in secular contexts. An example of this was that I was recently booked for a 6-week shoot in my film chaplain role. However, the very night before filming, was about to start, I received a call from the executive producer informing me that the team had decided to take a different direction and that I was no longer needed. And then when I really dug into this with them, the producer acknowledged that the primary reason for withdrawing my engagement was that a number of the cast and crew had expressed discomfort with the term chaplain, despite the inclusive framing that I offer through my FilmChaplain website. This quote, the cast and the crew feel uncomfortable with someone religious on set. And then finally, it's just off the radar for many. These experiences, though really disappointing, are actually really helpful to my research, as they are surfacing this recurring tension within my research and within my practice. And that is the cultural and semantic weight of religious language. The title Film Chaplain is proving heavier than intended, with the word chaplain carrying echoes of institutions, hierarchies and beliefs, and even experiences that sit uneasily within creative, largely secular domains such as the film industry. And for myself, as a white, middle-aged male Christian, I feel like a relic, bearing a tradition that I deeply value, while also wrestling with how to make it welcoming in spaces that flinch at its very name. New Zealand historian Peter Lynham makes a salient observation that spirituality in this country has replaced religion in our society. Formal religion is now seen as a very negative force by many in our society. Now, these challenges, while very real, are actually quite helpful in my research. And while exploring ways to address these roadblocks to access, one very significant pathway is emerging. While traditional forms of structured religion are really quite usually rejected within the film industry, spirituality, and particularly Māori spirituality, is readily accepted and even welcomed. And we have this very well-known holistic Māori model of health in New Zealand called Te Whare Tapa Whā. And it was developed by Sir Mason Jury in 1984. And it frames health and well-being as a wharenui, or a meeting house, which is what you can see there, whare meaning house, with the four walls, each representing a key dimension of health and well-being. And the idea behind this is that if one wall is weak or is damaged, then the entire house or the person's health and well-being is at risk. Te Whare Tapa Whā recognises the interconnectedness of the physical, the mental, the spiritual, and social well-being. And it, as I mentioned, it's widely accepted throughout our health system here in this country. And most people would know about Te Whare Tapa Whā. So I'll just take you through how it works. So Te Whare Tapa Whā, the first wall there is taha tinana, which represents physical health. It represents the physical body and its ability to function. The next one is taha hinaro, which is our mental and emotional health. And this wall represents our emotional and psychological well-being. Taha whānau, whānau meaning family. This wall represents the strength of relationships and sense of belonging within family and within our communities. And taha wairua, wairua meaning spirit. This wall represents the capacity for faith and spiritual connection and a sense of purpose. Now, where this becomes particularly compelling for me is when we overlay Kerrion Hodgson's holistic biopsychosocial spiritual schema that I mentioned earlier onto Te Whare Tapa Whā. I'll just take you through this again. Taha tinana, physical health, or Kerrion Hodgson's biological, physical. When there is injury to this wall, the whare suffers, the person suffers. Taha hinaro, mental, emotional, psychological injury. When there is an injury to this wall, the whare, the person suffers. Taha whānau, when there are injuries to our family and social relationships, the wall of this whare, this person, this wall of the whare suffers. And finally, taha wairua, our spirit or spirituality. When our spirit or our spirituality are morally injured, this wall of the whare suffers. Now, this intersection between Mason Jury's work and Kerrion Hodgson's work really excites me, as I think it offers a meaningful and culturally grounded access way for my research. And it might also provide a really robust and credible framework for FilmChaplain to grow from. So, to wrap this all up, my master's research revealed that moral injury was very much present in the film industry of Aotearoa New Zealand, and I suspect globally. My PhD research asks the questions, firstly, how can chaplaincy meaningfully respond to moral injury within the global film industry, particularly in secular contexts where traditional religious frameworks are absent or mistrusted? Secondly, what theological and practical adaptations are needed for chaplaincy to serve effectively in creative industries shaped by high stakes, high pressure environments. And finally, can a reimagined model of chaplaincy provide a holistic, culturally responsive, relevant care for those experiencing moral injury in film production settings? So the end game, as I move forward, my goal remains really clear and that is to demonstrate the need for a proven, academically sound film chaplaincy service, one that provides practical, compassionate care for the many camera operators, makeup artists, actors, directors, etc., who struggle in silence currently without any support. I also aim to bring or to create research that brings new thought to the Academy and specifically to moral injury research, and also to make a real difference in the lives of those who bring our films and our stories to life. And I hope that this work will shine a light on the hidden wounds of the film industry and offer a pathway towards sustainable and life-giving support.